Okay, welcome everybody to this first long Friday, and we're getting into the long Fridays, the long Shabbases. I hope your preparation is going well for Shabbos and for Pesach. Amazing that we've completed another week, and yes, we'll be on a little bit of a break. Next week's a busy week, and I'm afraid be in and out for each day. So I thought it was better to just take a break over Chol Hamoed, and then hopefully get back to these daily Rashis after Pesach. So I will share Rashi with you today. It's not quite from the sixth Aliyah, cheating a little bit. I'm going to take a Rashi from the seventh Aliyah here in Vayikra, which I hope you'll excuse me for, but I hope you'll enjoy as well. We've been talking about the various korbanos, the sacrifices that are mentioned here in the beginning of Vayikra. We talked about the korban ola, korban mincha, korban shlamim, and yesterday we talked about the korban chatas. That's the first of the obligatory korbanos, right? We talked about ola, mincha, and shlamim were voluntary sacrifices brought for a variety of different reasons. We transitioned yesterday to the chatas, the sin offering, which is the first of the required korbanos. After talking about various forms of sin offering with the korban chatas, which are brought again for inadvertent sins. If you violate a mitzvah deoraisa based on certain parameters, b'shogeg, accidentally or not on purpose, then you would bring a korban chatas. Then the Torah transitions to another two types of korbanos, the korban asham and the korban asham talui. The korban asham is the guilt offering. The guilt offering is brought not for inadvertent sins like the korban chatas, but for a very specific brand and variety of purposeful sins based on various kinds of circumstance. There's one type of asham, which is called asham talui, the variable asham or the doubtful asham. That asham is brought by a person who does violate something for which you don't really get a korban asham, but rather you would get either a korban chatas or kares, but it's uncertain whether they're really liable for the korban chatas or they're really liable for kares because it's unclear whether they actually violated that avera. So they can't do nothing because it's quite possible they did violate it, but they also can bring the korban chatas or whatever the case would be, because it's not clear that they're obligated in it, and it's an obligatory sacrifice, not a voluntary one, and therefore they can bring this kind of asham, this kind of guilt offering, which is kind of to hold their atonement at bay, or to hold their punishment at bay until they figure out what they actually violated, and if they did, then they would have to bring the required korban. That's the asham tole. Once it's in this discussion of ashamos, of korban asham, guilt offerings, Torah goes into some of the detail of the Asham Gezelos, the Korban Asham brought for various kinds of theft, various kinds of robbery, various kinds of lying in oaths. Those are some of the cases where if you did those things purposefully, you would have to bring a Korban Asham. There's an interesting pasuk in the seventh Aliyah having to do with this Asham Gezelos, with this Asham which is brought for a variety of types of robbery and theft. The pasuk says, Nefesh ki techta u'ma lamal b'Hashem v'chichesh ba'amito b'pikadon or b'tzumet yad or b'gazel or ashak et amito or matzah aveda v'chichesh ba v'nishba sheker, etc. All kinds of theft type situations where you're holding on to someone else's property, or you're not repaying them correctly, or you stole something from them. And in those cases, you, the thief, is in possession of someone else's mammon, someone else's property, but the other person, because they don't have the required proof, is not able to extract that property from you. And in the course of the proceedings, you make a false oath saying that you don't really owe that person the property back, and you're found to be guilty. V'chichesh ba'amito, you lied in the process. You took a false oath against your friend saying you don't owe them the money, you don't owe them back the property, you're not in possession of this theft, whatever the oath would be. If you're found to be lying in that oath, you have to bring an asham, a korban asham, a guilt offering for that false oath having to do with theft. I know it's very complicated. This is like 10 shiurim condensed into 10 seconds. But for that kind of case, you would bring a korban asham. What's strange here is that the beginning of the pasuk says, Nefesh ki techta, umala mal b'Hashem, v'chichesh b'amito. The real case here is nefesh kitachta. A person sins by v'chichesh v'amito, by taking a false oath against their friend in one of these interpersonal monetary kinds of cases. Why does the Torah add in umal amal b'Hashem, which is a way of saying that you stole from God, or you violated or trespassed something to do with God? What's the English here? If anyone sins and commits a trespass against Hashem. Me'ila, mal mal b'Hashem, usually connotes using something that is sacred property without permission, something that belongs to God, taking something from the Beis HaMikdash, utilizing a korban inappropriately for personal use when it really belongs to God. You're stealing from God or misappropriating temple property. That's called me'ila. That's mala mal b'Hashem. You kind of mounted this trespass against God by taking his property, right? But here you didn't take God's property. You took your friend's property and you lied about it, right? So the pasuk should have just said, Nefesh kitechta v'chichesh b'amito. Why does it add in mala ma b'Hashem? You're not stealing God's property over here. So Rashi says, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva asked this question. Why does the pasuk include me'ila against Hashem in a pasuk that's about a false oath for stealing from another person? Normally in monetary cases, person lends money, a person borrows money, a person has a business transaction, all the cases where theft would come into play. Normally those transactions are made with an edim and a shtar, with witnesses and with a contract. So when you lie about the theft, when you lie about holding on to that property, you're really negating or going against other human beings, the witnesses and the physical contract, which the person has, right? Let's say the person, someone lent me money and we wrote up a contract, we signed it with witnesses, the money transferred ownership, I have the money. Now the guy comes back and he asks for his loan back. He calls the loan. And I said, and what loan? I don't have your money. Or I already repaid. Those would be different claims, actually, but one of the two. And I swear, I make an oath in Beis Din that I don't owe the guy the money. Now the guy he lost the shtar, let's say. He lost the contract, and he can't find the edim, so he doesn't have enough proof to extract the money from me. In that case, if I am found to be lying in my oath, I would have to bring a korban asham for stealing. But my false oath in that case was really against the witnesses in the shtar, which would have been the proof. They are the other parties to this transaction. Ava, says Rashi, but, says Rashi, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, there are certain kinds of theft which would be included in this case, which don't include edim and a shtar. Avahamafkit etzel chavero ve'eno rotze sheteda bo neshama ela shlishi shebeinehem. When you lend something to another person, or you store something by another person, you don't want necessarily anybody to know about it. You're not going to write up a contract, and you're not going to have witnesses. The only people who will know is you, the person you're lending it to, or giving it to watch, and the third party, which is Hashem. Those are the only people that know. So when you take the false oath in that case is a false oath against Hashem. That's a me'ila b'Hashem. That's a trespass against God. Because essentially what you're saying is that you're denying the existence of God knowing what you truly did. This is a fascinating paradigm, and I thought it was interesting to mention. It highlights, first of all, that almost in any case of ben adam l'chavera, an interpersonal avera, you also have a ben adam l'makom component. You also have a component of sinning against God. But specifically in cases where the way the transaction went down avoided other human beings, and it was all hidden from other human beings, and the only person who truly knows is God, then when you take that false oath in court, you're not only violating a ben adam l'chavero and a ben adam l'makom, but you're doing something worse against God. It's a me'ila b'Hashem. You're mounting this trespass, this denigration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because essentially you're saying that you don't believe that God's watchful eye is upon you. You realize that in the human realm, you can't get away with very much. People are watching you. But when it comes to God, okay, you pretend God didn't see. You pretend God wasn't there. It's an act of kfira. It's an act of heresy. It's a much more problematic kind of oath than one in which the only thing you're up against is someone else's word. In this case, you're up against the eye of Hashem. And if you think you could ignore that, that's a me'ilah b'Hashem. Very fascinating way to look at these kinds of cases, interpersonal cases. And also, of course, a lesson to us about the need to always be cognizant of God's presence. And as the Gemara tells us, Alavai, we should all have Mora Shamayim Kimora Basav Adam. We should all have the fear of heaven, the awe of heaven, just as we have of other human beings who we can see and feel before us. Much more difficult with a hidden God, but something we are supposed to achieve as well. I wish you all a great Shabbos ahead. Take good care.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Be well.
Bye-bye.